All right, so we will move to public expression for non-agendized items. Lily, do we have any public expression for non-agendized items?
We don't.
All right, so we will move on to our one and only topic for today, which is the discussion of possible action regarding the Measure B Mendocino County Grand Jury report. This report was written, as we know, by the grand jury. And as I stated a little earlier, there is a request for the Board of Supervisors to respond. And also you'll see there's a request for the auditor controller to respond and the director of behavioral health. I did not feel that the director of behavioral health should be responding to the Measure B portion without the Measure B committee, because I wasn't sure if they thought I'd be speaking for the Measure B committee, and I really wanted to make sure that the answers are reflective of the full committee and not just the Department of Behavioral Health, which is why I asked for a special meeting so we could respond as a committee to the questions. And also, as I said, so that the Board of Supervisors would also be able to hear how we would respond to even the questions they're being asked to respond to, and the auditor controller will have questions. And I think it would be good to go through all of their findings and recommendations to as a committee and have some response. Whether or not the auditor and the Board of Supervisors use that, that it will be up to those entities. But I will, on behalf of the behavioral health director and as behavioral director, I will be using the committee responses as my responses to the grand jury report. And so that's really important to me. Yes, Commissioner Riley.
So I'm not sure if everyone on this committee has had an opportunity to respond to a grand jury report, but I'm sure you know, Janine, there are very specific parameters with which we can answer. There's, specific language.
Right.
Sometimes we want to elaborate and we can't, or it's not appropriate. And I was just going to pull up and see if I could find the types of responses that we're expected to make. Do you have a document with that information that you could share with the committee, or is everybody already aware of this? Okay.
No.
Do you have the parameters for response, Janine?
Let me see if I can grab it, and we can, Lily, let's see if you can grab it, or I can grab it and we can pull it up and share.
Thank you. It's a challenge.
It is.
What dictates these parameters? I mean, I don't quite understand.
I feel like I'm not being very articulate here, and I apologize for that. It's the grand jury tells you you either agree, partially agree, or disagree. There's very certain words that you can use, and you can only elaborate on some things. So it's very, very specific. Sometimes we want to give a paragraph response, and they only want a sentence. So hopefully we can share that information with the group, and that'll provide a little clarity. Sorry, I'm not being more clear. It's been a while since I had to respond to one, and I'm not sure I have a sample document at my fingertips here.
Well, there's not an ordinance or law that prevents us from explaining our answer. I know that some people have felt a shorter response is better, and I can agree with that on many questions. But in looking at this, and I'm not trying to jump ahead, but in looking at this, there's actually only one recommendation that involves a Measure B, and that's recommendation number 2. Recommendations 1, 3, and 4 do not involve Measure B committee. So it's actually our role in this response is very limited unless there's paperwork I didn't receive. It's just we believe our grand jury wants to know our feelings on SUDT funding, and I think we're all going to be in support of it. So I don't think we need to get in the minutia of what they do want or don't want. Let's just explain it, and I certainly trust Janine enough to understand, for her to understand what our thought process is and to put it in words, because if we spend all day wordsmithing this as a group of 11 people, we'll be here until tomorrow.
And, oh, I just sent that to Janine.
Yeah, Lily had it, so we just pulled it up. We wanted to make sure we had it. Thank you, Supervisor Hashtag also. So Lily, can you enlarge that a little? And you'll see, as Commissioner Riley pointed out, usually it's we agree with the finding, we disagree wholly or partially, and then in those cases, what are we disputing? And shall include an explanation for the reason therefore. So that's sort of what we would be, how we would be responding, and we will definitely draft it to meet those that requirement as we talk about it as a committee.
Janine, I have a question.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
It says not only giving money, but it also mentions Ford Street asking for a bequest. And so, I mean, I think those two are separate. Is that right?
Yes, those would be separate, correct.
So we're not talking about Ford Street today at all?
No, we will be, Ford Street's request will come back to our September meeting. The Board of Supervisors had an item regarding Ford Street on their calendar earlier this month. And there is direction to gather some additional information and bring that back to the committee. So Ford Street is working with behavioral health and Supervisor Mulhern to work on some additional documentation that we will be presenting to the Measure B committee at our September meeting.
So I came prepared to say something about the Ford Street, but I guess today is not the day I say that. Is that right?
Well, I think you can, Ace, if you want to mention it. I think it's absolutely okay to mention it, but I think we will be discussing the proposal at the September meeting.
Okay. So what will the discussion today be about?
The discussion today is just reviewing the grand jury's findings and recommendations and how we as a committee would potentially respond, so that we're giving some feedback for the Board of Supervisors to consider. And as I write it as the Director of Behavioral Health, that the committee is in agreement to what the responses are. Commissioner Riley. Sorry, Ace, go ahead.
No. SUDT refers not just to rehab. There's also the treatment that goes on already throughout the county. So rehab, I say, is probably the what we need more of.
Right. So, and we can get into that discussion as we talk about what is substance use disorders treatment. It's a broad spectrum, as it's a continuum of care, right? So we have to talk about all continuums of care as we look at that. Commissioner Riley. Shannon, you're muted.
Sorry, I thought I had unmuted. So for clarity, and I think to Tom's point, the Measure B committee is not specifically asked to respond to any of this report, but you're asking for input on the items that response is requested from the Director of Behavioral Health Department. Is that right, Janine?
Yeah, specifically regarding the Director of Behavioral Health, but I also wanted us to review, because the board of supervisors has some to respond to, and I think it would be good for us to at least just touch on them. Do we agree or do we not agree? The board will have to make their own decision. But I think as a committee that we may just want to weigh into how we feel about that. And I think we can be quick. I don't think we have to, spend hours saying yes or no, and we can get through those findings pretty quickly.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Ebion?
Yes, I just wanted some clarification. It's related to ACE's questions about Ford Street, and you said that the Board of Supervisors had asked for more information. Will the Measure B committee be meeting will our September meeting take place before the Board of Supervisors takes any action on Ford Street?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. The board did want Measure B to weigh in, so that will definitely Measure B will be a part of that.
Great, thank you.
So I'm hoping we can we'll go ahead and start. Are there Shannon, did you have more questions, or is your hand just still up? Just don't want to miss something. All right. Okay. So if we can go through this quickly, the ones that, if you look at where it says Director of Behavioral Health, those are the ones that I think I definitely would, I will draft the response, but like to get some opinion from Measure B as a committee. But we'll go ahead and quickly, as you know, the Board of Supervisors has to respond to all findings and then a couple of the recommendations. So if we want to start with finding 1, does anybody have any, as we look at finding 1 as a committee, how would we respond, and anything we would want the Board of Supervisors to know as they respond to number 1's finding?
Almond does,
Yes.
because I wrote most of the measure. When a measure is written and before it goes on the ballot and before signatures are gathered, it has to be reviewed by county council. And recommendation 1 is 100% in the ball court of county council to make sure they they make sure the language is correct, because it's not up to the Board of Supervisors, or it's not up to any government agency when a group of citizens wants to put a ballot initiative on the ballot. They can put, we want to change the name of Monday to Moon Day, who knows? And then they go out and collect signatures. So it's not up to anybody except county council and the Board of Supervisors to make sure that language is in there. So that's all I have to say. And our ballot initiative was approved by county council, and apparently it didn't have this stuff in there. So the response should be from them. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else have a comment on finding 1?
Janine, do we still have to have that those requirements up on the screen? It'd be nice to be able to see everybody.
No, we can go ahead and move those. Lily, you can stop screen sharing so that that's fine. Thank you. All right, so we'll move over on down to finding 2. Any comments, questions? Well, we can't answer a lot of questions, but any comments on finding 2?
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think this is related to Tom's comment. So if I may ask Member Allman, are you saying that it's not the it's not the measure, the ordinance itself that should provide that lack of clarity, that the measure was perhaps written correctly in terms of legal requirements and whatnot, and that was not the place to lay out the responsibility of the Measure B ordinance or the Measure B committee? Does that make sense? Sorry.
Well, because we were building an animal that had never been built before, there were a lot of things that we didn't think about. And obviously, hindsight's 2020. I wish we had done several changes before it had been signed by the voters. But once again, finding number 2 would be a direction from the Board of Supervisors to their employee, county council, to make sure this meets the criteria, so the future will not be hindered by lack of clarity. I mean, that's the whole purpose of getting an attorney to review it to prevent future problems, and that's where this responsibility lays.
I agree with that. I think it's difficult to point to any one place. Hindsight, of course, is 2020. So whether there should have been more clarity in the measure and the ordinance, or there should have been more immediate direction from the Board of Supervisors or something, I don't know where to place the blame here. So I would say I agree with finding number 2 without pointing blame in any place in particular.
Well, I don't have a problem pointing blame. The responsibility should be to the group of legal experts who reviewed it. And for one reason or another, they had never seen one similar like this, but I had never seen one similar to this again. But, you know, just like in everything, there should be one person, you know, to blame if a mistake is made. And it's certainly logical to look at the legal person that reviewed this and gave it a thumbs up. And then 5 years later, when people say, well, this should have been in there, well, you're right. It's not the biggest mistake in the world, but we've learned our lesson. And maybe the Board of Supervisors could set up some type of policy that encourages, not mandates, encourages citizens to follow these rules. Because like I said, citizens don't, when they collect signatures, if the county council didn't agree with it, the citizens could still say, we want people to sign this and we're going to get it on the ballot anyway. And then the county, you know, might have the whole thing thrown out. But to say that citizens or anybody collecting signatures has to do this is not part of a democracy. That's, citizens carry a lot more weight than Board of Supervisors or anybody. I mean, that's the power of the vote. So recommendations is a word that we should be using. And I think that we could, if we wanted to answer it, we'd say, we recommend that the Board of Supervisors develop some type of policy that gives county council more clarity and oversight in reviewing potential ballot initiatives.
Well, this is just a finding that we either agree, partially agree, or disagree with this finding.
Well, who's to disagree? Because hindsight's given us a very clear picture. And so we really can't disagree, because I would agree with everything on there. The responsibilities of the committee were unclear. You know, if I had written it again, I would have said that each member of the Board of Supervisors can, appoint their representative, and that person must live in their district. But the ballot initiative doesn't even say that. So there's a lot of things that could be clear on this. So we could recommend they do it, but, you know, and I wouldn't disagree with any part of this.
Any other committee member comments? Yes, Commissioner Edwards.
Well, I'm still actually sitting with finding 1, the sentence, there is insufficient organizational direction in the Measure B ordinance. I'm not quite clear what they mean by organizational direction. And I guess I'm not quite clear what they mean by that. Does someone have an idea?
I'd be willing to take a stab at it. I think when we started, there was lack of clarity about how much authority the Measure B committee actually had. And I think there was confusion amongst some members about, are we actually providing direction? No, we're just providing recommendations to the Board of Supervisors. We did not have a strategic plan to start with. We did not even have a needs assessment to start with. There was not a clear direction of processes. We did not have a project manager. So I think all of that contributed to just this kind of what they're calling insufficient organizational direction. So our question here, my question is was that the responsibility of the ordinance? Mr. Allman is suggesting it's the responsibility of county council. So again, hindsight is 2020, but does that answer your question, Sherry?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Any other commissioner questions or comments? All right, any public questions or comments on finding 1 or 2?
So is this the one where we either wholly agree, or wholly disagree, or partially disagree? Is that how the level of evaluation?
Yeah, so Sherry, we can definitely agree or disagree. As Commissioner Almond, he said he agreed with finding 1 and 2. So we
Okay.
definitely can. The ones when we get to F3, which is where the Director of Behavioral Health, I really want us to have that conversation. Do we agree? Do we partially or wholly agree? And then if we don't agree, what would we add to that response? Commissioner Muschetti?
Sorry, my hand wasn't up. Sorry.
Well, yes, your hand was up. So, all right. So, no, I don't see any public comment on finding 1 and 2. All right. Finding 3. And so, Commissioner, comments on finding 3. And do we want to, I know Commissioner Brash had a question on substance use treatment, so maybe this is a good time as we go into 3 of what are the different treatment levels for substance use within the community, and then kind of that continuum of care. And so I'll just kind of briefly do just a broad overview. We know that we have outpatient services, so that is a pretty common treatment for substance use that both Medi-Cal and private insurance pays for. And then you have more of your kind of residential levels that you can go up. All clients are assessed, usually using what we call an ASAMS level to determine what level of care they need. And that can go from outpatient to residential to detox. So residential is pretty much similar across the state of the different types. It's a residential treatment. People go in and they're in residential. And then when we start talking about detox, there's 2 levels of detox, right? There's medical detox and social model detox. Both types of detox are used. They're depending on what your level of detox is where we would determine whether it needs to be medical or social model detox. And then we have sober living environments, which is allows for transition out of like residential into still sort of a treatment model, and provides a good 30 plus days of stay to transition back into your community while you're just coming out of being in treatment. There are also harm reduction models out there that you will see. Harm reduction models can include outpatient, and it can also include harm reduction in living environments. So where someone isn't completely clean or sober, but they are slowly getting off their drug of choice or alcohol, and may still be using some other drugs or alcohol. So we see that harm reduction model. So those are kind of a broad look of what we see. And of course, as you look at a continuum of care that, we would hope to be able to build in Mendocino County, a continuum of care that includes all levels of treatment, so that there's an option based on your level of need. Commissioner Almond.
And Janine, I appreciate your knowledge on this one. It's very good, but I think you're digging too deep. I think that the finding is specifically about Measure B and any funding that we've supported in going towards what you've discussed. And the truth of the matter is we haven't given a lot to SUDT. So while those programs are going, I think that this is a really fair response for the grand jury to say, hey, Measure B said you're going to do this and you're not doing this. What's your answer? And our answer is, well, we're working right now on getting it done, and we're working and it's going to be on next month's agenda. So don't dig too deep into this, because I think it's just specifically Measure B funding.
Right. So I was responding to Commissioner Barash, who asked the question about
Right.
SUDT services. So I agree with you. It is a question. Did we direct funding? I would say, Tom, that the answer is I don't 100% agree that we didn't direct any funding, because we did, but it's a small amount. So when you talk about your dual response, they are responding to substance use and mental health, right? And co-occurring. Your aftercare services, same thing. Your respite center, when it gets open, does have to treat that. is it at the level we should be addressing it? And is there a need for more of Measure B and substance use to augment our continuum of care? 100%. So that's not a question. I would just, for me, I wouldn't say 100% we haven't done anything, because some of the programs we built are working with those co-occurring. And sometimes it's just drugs and alcohol, and we're working to get people in treatment, but it's not enough. It's a really small percentage, with the majority of the focus being on mental health.
And if somebody took the time to go back and read all of our minutes, I think they would find very few words, and I'm just as guilty as anybody else of funding what you're talking about. So sometimes with a grand jury, and I speak from experience of responding many years, you throw yourself on a sword and say, you're right, we weren't paying attention, and we're going to improve. And it's that simple. I mean, we all have busy lives. So let's just move on and say, we need to work on this.
Commissioner Riley?
Yeah, for me, the key word in this sentence is direct funding. There has been no direct funding for substance abuse disorder treatment. And so I would agree with that finding. While I don't disagree that there have been some benefits related to substance abuse, we have not made any conscious effort to provide direct funding for substance abuse treatment.
Commissioner Barash.
So Commissioner Allman was talking about how perhaps we just weren't paying attention. I think that may be the case to some extent, but I think there's also, as we saw at the last meeting, there's a certain amount of, we are sort of being perched in order to measure. Fort Street comes to the committee and asks for all of this money and says, you haven't given anything, so here's the obvious place to put it. And I would just like to point out a certain amount of resistance to giving the money to Fort Street that has more to do with Fort Street than our own forgetfulness. And I don't know if this is a place to specifically talk about that, but I'll leave that to you.
No, I think that topic will be best for the September meeting.
Okay.
So I think we have to decide as a committee, would we answer this as we agree, 100% we just agree. And I think Shannon pointed out that comment of no direct funding, or do we disagree partially or wholly? And if we disagree, what would we add in there? Commissioner Rich.
I just want to apologize for my tardiness, and also state that I would agree with the third finding that there has not been any direct funding for SUDT.
All right, so it sounds like we have at least 3 commissioners, and Commissioner Allman, let me know if I'm not saying this right, because I'm taking as you agree with the, you agree. And
I agree.
So, yes, okay, that's what I thought. So Commissioner Moschetti.
I agree also.
I agree also.
All right, so I'm going to go with, let's do a quick vote, because if we agree, we're just done. Lily, can you just do a roll call? Well, wait, someone want to make a motion that we would answer this with agree in a second, and we can get, yes, Shannon.
I move that we agree with finding 3.
All in second.
All right, Lily, quick roll call.
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Barish,
Yes.
Commissioner Ebion,
Yes.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Moschetti,
Yes.
and Chair Miller, sorry.
Yes.
So we didn't do that for findings 1 and 2. Do we need to?
We can, but we're not, I'm not responding to those, so that will be on the board. I won't be putting this in a report based on mine and your guys' response to that.
Okay.
I do want to ask, just in case we probably should have, any public comment on finding 3? All right, I don't see any. All right, let's go to finding 4. Any commissioner comments, questions on finding 4?
I would agree with that finding.
I would
we
also
could of course
agree.
clarify that it's in progress, but the fact of the matter is that when this report was done, this finding was true according to my information.
I would also agree with this finding.
I would agree with this finding. However, the last sentence of this finding says the audits were not performed and resulting in no definitive answer to what funds are available or have been extended. I would disagree with that part because our monthly financial reports are very clear of what monies have come in and what monies have gone out. I mean, specifically to the employee themselves. So while there hasn't been the official word audit done on this, the financial reports every meeting clearly could refute that last sentence.
I think the only reason I would question that comment, Tom, is it says resulting in no definitive answer. And to me, that word definitive means it was done by an auditor.
I agree. And so we can say it was done by, government employees.
Okay.
But there was no audit,
Right.
Commissioner Rich.
I would agree with Commissioner Allman. Clearly, there was no audit, but we've been tracking the financials. They've been publicly available, so it's not that there's no definitive answer. There is no audit.
But I think that's what gets attached to the audit is that label. It is a definitive answer. And our monthly financial reports have been definitely useful, but I don't think I would classify them as definitive answers to funds available or expended.
And the response could say exactly that, Sherry. I agree.
Okay.
All right. Any other comments or questions on finding 4? Any public comments or questions? It looks like, Lily, we have Joe Bradley.
Yes.
Joe, if you want to unmute, go ahead and ask your question.
I'm looking at this, and you guys have been putting out your monthly information. The last 2.5 years has been exceptional, and the county hasn't been running normally. Nothing has pretty much run normally. We've all been dodging COVID, and you've lost people. You've lost people in your financial departments. I don't think this was an intentional oversight. And I don't know how to say that, or how you would say that, or if you just say, yeah, we agree, and say nothing about it, or does that go in your report? That's just a thought that popped into my head.
All right. Any other commissioner comments or questions before we move on? Supervisor
Janine, are we not going to, does that require a response from us? I don't think it does.
It does not. It's okay. Definitely something that that this requires a response from the Board of Supervisors and the auditor's office because they were in charge of the audits.
Right. Okay.
Supervisor Haschek, you can go ahead and unmute.
Yeah, that was just my question too, is there a response there? Because what I'm seeing is for the Board of Supervisors, and I was wondering about what your report had to respond to. So, it seems like if there was a response to it, it could be a good place to kind of clarify what you're talking about the audit versus the financial reports.
Any other commissioner want to make comments on finding 4 or how? I think Supervisor Haschek, you had a variety of responses from commissioners from agree to possibly disagree partially from the perspective of that while the audit wasn't performed, it is now. We have questions about the audit that was performed. And I am being told, hopefully, that the auditor and the outside independent auditor will be at our next meeting to discuss those reports with us. So that is hopefully what I've been told will happen. We do feel that at least there was some financial reporting done on a monthly basis. So I think those are the two. Let me know if I missed anything, commissioners, on kind of different ways the commission is kind of looking at, or we feel. Supervisor Hashtag, did you have any other questions on that?
Well, yeah, and then there is a 15-month part or time period at the very beginning that wasn't audited, but according to your statement in the board meeting, that was going to be rectified and that part was going to be audited.
Yeah, that's for finding 5, and that it was my understanding, because the auditor was in charge of this piece, that there was a decision to start with the first 2 years, make sure the reports met the standard of what the committee wanted, and then go back and do the full audit, and then any years going forward. So that was my understanding. Of course, our retired auditor was part of that, Lloyd Weir, and so that's what we know when we wrote the contract with Lloyd. That was our understanding. All right, so we'll move on from finding 4. We kind of started finding 5. Commissioner comments, questions on finding 5. Commissioner Riley.
This is, in my mind, basically the same as 4. So we could clarify and say that is in progress now, but it is true that the first 15 months were excluded.
Any other comments or questions? Any public comments or questions? All right, moving on to finding 6. Any comments or questions on finding 6?
Yes, I have a question in terms of the PUF unit. Who is my understanding is the county is going to contract with an outside entity to operate the PUF. Will they be responsible for staffing the PUF as well?
Yeah, so the county did a request for information for a potential contractor, and the contractor that won that was Telecare. And Telecare has been working with the construction company as we look to build the facility to make sure that it meets that all state federal requirements. They are aware of that it is their requirement to staff and operate the facility. During that, there was a question whether or not they were concerned to be in a small rural county, and staffing can be an issue, whether that would hinder their ability to operate. And at that point, they had said no, they were not worried about that.
Thank you.
Janine, there's actually a factual error in F6. The last sentence says this problem plagued the previous PUF facility, which led to its closures. I guess that's partially correct. Staffing was part of the reason. I was certainly here, and I remember why it closed, but there were a couple suicides as well as budgetary reasons. So I'm not trying to say that we need to correct the grand jury, but that sentence is extremely misleading.
I think, Tom, there is my opinion, and I'm not speaking, I don't know where the grand jury got this, but I think there is misinformation throughout the community why the PUF closed, and that is, I think, unfortunate, because I hear all 3 reasons often, and then sometimes just one reason. Right. And so I think, unfortunately, there is misinformation and clarity on why did our PUF close, what was the reason, and it's just too bad, because it does create this misinformation channel. So, Commissioner Riley.
Yeah, just I guess an anecdotal comment. It bothers me also that these two issues have been combined into one finding. And so I'm grateful that we're not responsible for answering this one.
Any other commissioner questions, comments?
But we're not responding to this, correct?
No, this is not ours. We can, I think Supervisor Haschak is, would welcome any of our comments. So since the board has to respond, so I think he's welcome to hear whatever we feel to help them respond. Supervisor Haschak.
Yeah, I'm writing down these comments. So thank you for helping me fill it out too.
Any other commissioner questions or comments on finding 6? Any public comments or questions on finding 6? All right, finding 7 is one that we are going to respond to. And so any commissioner comments, questions on finding 7?
Certainly going to be very similar to finding 3.
So are you saying you agree 100%, or how would you answer that, Tom?
Well, no one can predict the future, and all they're doing is expressing their concern. And so we can say we're aware of it, as our answer in response number 3 was. And we understand, while we don't have to by law follow the Kemper report, I think the Kemper report does provide us a decent roadmap to where we should go on this. So that would be a fair response.
Commissioner Riley?
Yeah, this is the kind of finding that is probably the most difficult to respond to, because it's asking us to agree with someone else's feelings, which are not our own. But it is stated in this report that the grand jury is concerned and that they interviewed service providers who are concerned. So based on their own research, I think we could agree with their findings. But this is a very kind of gray area, difficult to answer question.
Supervisor Ebiam.
So the language in this finding that SUDT programs will not receive adequate attention and funding, that word adequate is really nebulous. As Tom mentioned, in the Kemper report, the recommended allocation for SUDT services was 10% of all the revenues. So is that what the Measure B committee is going to use as a guide for what is adequate funding? It's just really vague.
And I think, Sherry, that's a conversation we'll have to have as we go to September, right?
Yeah.
I think the Kemper report has often been an interesting conversation with our committee. But I think it is a conversation we do have to have. And I don't think we're held to Kemper's 10%, right? I mean, it's a recommendation.
Oh,
So I think it's really up to the committee to decide what is going to be adequate and what needs to be funded to substance use.
I'm inclined to just agree with this finding and say, yeah, we agree that people are concerned. And we're going to attempt to rectify that in the coming months.
Other questions, comments, other commissioners that agree with Commissioner Riley?
Almond agrees.
Commissioner Rich agrees.
I agree as well.
Commissioner Sketty agrees. So would we want to say that we agree and add a caveat to that we are, however Measure B is currently is looking at this, because technically we don't have to if we agree, but we could add that in if we wanted.
Sure, it's on future agendas.
Okay. So I want to make a motion.
Can I just say one last thing? It just seems really, it seems really odd that as a committee, we're going to agree with whether the grand jury and the service providers are concerned. That's
Welcome
Well,
to-
they're telling
welcome
us
to
that they
government,
are.
Chair.
they're
Yeah.
telling us that they are, but when we agree to that, when we agree to this finding, aren't we agreeing to their being concerned?
We're not agreeing. We're not agreeing with their concerns necessarily. We're agreeing that we have heard that they are concerned. It's really hard. I know.
Okay.
Sure, if you have a better way you want to respond, throw it out there. And we can all consider it.
Yeah, no, I don't think, I hadn't thought about it till now, so I don't. Just like what I heard said that it's on future agendas. Yeah.
So I'll make a motion that we agree with finding F7 with a note that discussion about this matter is agendized for the near future, or however you want to phrase that, Janine.
Alderman will second.
And do we want to note that Shannon, do you want to add that we'll say we agree that the grand jury and service providers have expressed concern? So since that will clear up some of the other commissioners' concern that we're not, and then we can just say we agree that the grand jury and service providers have concerned, and we have this agendized for future meetings. Does that work?
Yes, that works. Thank you.
Okay. Lily, did you get that?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's make sure, do we have any public comment before we take a vote? All right, seeing none, Lily, could you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Barish,
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiom,
Yes.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Muschetti,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. All right, moving to finding 8. Commissioner comments, questions on finding 8?
This is really the same thing. The grand jury in this report has expressed concerns. So my inclination is to agree that they are concerned. And I suppose we could add the caveat that construction is in process and we're monitoring closely the expenses related to it.
Other comments, questions?
I would just agree with Commissioner Riley's assessment.
Do we want to say anything to address why the costs to construct the PUF are so high? Or is that not in the
No.
purview here?
No, that's,
I
that would be a
didn't think
sticky
so.
wicket.
Yeah, okay.
I concur that this isn't the place.
Yeah.
All right, any other commissioner comments, concerns? All right, are we, and it is, so does someone want to, Shannon, do you want to make a motion with what, how you recommended we answer it? And then see if we have a second.
Sure, I'm happy to move that we agree with finding F8 with additional explanation that construction of the PUF, excuse me, PUF facility is underway and staff and committee are closely monitoring expenses.
Alderman will second, but I'll ask Shannon if we can just add in there that the language of Measure B clearly talked about a PUF. And so high cost, low cost, no cost, whatever, it's a cost. And it's a cost of providing a PUF for our county. And so prevailing wage is a driving force of the high cost. And so I would ask Shannon to just, if we could add the one sentence that the PUF is mentioned in the original language, and we're proceeding with that. I'd appreciate that.
That's great.
I'll accept that.
Any questions or comments on that motion? Any public comments or questions? All right, Lily, will you do a roll call?
I'm sorry, Commissioner Miller,
Yes,
or Chair Miller, excuse me. Could Lillian please,
you went on mute, Donna.
could Lillian please read that back so we make sure that we have the language we want?
Yes.
So that the committee agrees and that we are closely monitoring the expenses related to the PUF. And then you said Commissioner Almond wants to include that the language is in the the PUF is in the language of the Measure B ordinance, so the language is in there to construct a PUF. He wants to add that. Did I miss anything?
Are you good, Commissioner Moschetti?
Yes, as long as the motioner and the second are fine with that.
Almond is.
Thank you,
Right.
Lillian.
Riley is.
All right, Lily, go ahead and do the roll call.
Commissioner Almond,
Aye.
Commissioner Barish,
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiam,
Yes.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Moschetti,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. Right, we have a participant question. Lily, did you want to let Joe Bradley in to ask her question? It's in the Q&A, but we should have her ask it publicly.
Go ahead, Joe.
Oh, I just put it in there, and I don't know if that can be added. When we've been talking about the PUF and the building and the size of it, we've talked about other offices in it. Would there be a place for drug treatment in the building also? Yes, as we all know, there's a lot of dual diagnosis that happens anyway. So there would have to be some of that in there. But I don't know if this is the place to bring it up. That's why I put it in as a question.
Yeah, I know, but the public can't see the question and answer section, which is why I wanted to make sure that we brought it public so that the public who may be watching the video or other participants are able to know that the question was asked. In regards to do psychiatric health facilities provide substance use treatment? Not at the level of residential or detox where they're outpatient. They will treat the patient while they're in that acute phase. You know, when most people go in, it's a 3 to 7 day stay. They will make recommendations for treatment as they exit the facility. They don't generally do residential or detox at that level. They may need to do some detox if someone is going to detox while they're within that facility on that hold. But they're not a direct substance use program. But they will, like co-occurring, they're going to treat in that moment and then refer them to treatment.
Well, I guess my question is will the building have enough room to possibly have a facility separate from mental health?
That is where, at this point, no, that's not within the plans of the PUF. You then have to make sure that we don't create an IMD exclusion. Remember when you go over that 16 beds, that Medi-Cal billable piece gets triggered. Right now, the facility will house NAMI and will house the psychiatric health facility.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I didn't think to put the count of the beds in all that too.
All right, let's go on. So we are moving on to, we finished the findings section, and we're going to move on to the recommendations. And these are the grand jury recommends. So we will start with R1. This isn't one that we have to respond to, of course. It is one that the Board of Supervisors has to respond to. So I think they would definitely like to hear how we would respond to it. So any commissioner questions, comments, and for recommendation 1?
Janine, are you specifically talking about recommendation number 2 or all?
Recommendation number 1, which I think we kind of answered.
Yeah, I mean, we're all by ourselves, and that's, like I said earlier, I don't want to repeat myself, but this is county council, period.
So Commissioner Allman, your recommendation, and I know we already talked about this sort of in finding 1 and 2, is that the county needs to do a better job and make sure county council is rating them and making sure they meet all the requirements going forward.
Right, but it's not our role to even respond to that. You know, Supervisor Haschak is on the meeting and he's listening to it and he's writing notes, and I would imagine he'll say something in that regard at the public response, but I'm not saying that we need to clearly say the fewer words the better, but if we don't need to respond to the grand jury, they have enough stuff, you know, let's just respond to what we have to, and not step on the feet of other agency or other parts of government that are going to respond and have been asked to respond to this.
Supervisor Haschak, you had your hand up. Go ahead.
Yeah, I totally appreciate the conversation before, and I have taken note of it. I had already written that, you know, the county council is working on this fire department and fire prevention ordinance, and that I'll talk to county council to make sure that, you know, the detail is there going with this ordinance and others going forward. So.
All right. Any other committee questions or comments? Any public question, comments? All right. So we will move to recommendation number 2, which is one of the ones that are being asked to respond to. Commissioner questions, comments on recommendation 2? Yes, Commissioner Riley.
So I want to make sure we're all on the same page that this one says that the Board of Supervisors should fund substance use treatments as required by Measure B ordinance, which is not the same as the Kemper report. So I pulled out the ordinance itself, and the only language that I see in the actual ordinance is provide for the necessary infrastructure to support and stabilize individuals with behavioral health conditions, including addiction and neurological disorders. So it does not state, you know, this is not where it says 10% or a dollar amount, anything else. It just says we will provide for the necessary infrastructure to support and stabilize. So with that language, then I agree with this recommendation.
Shannon, where in I pulled the ordinance up too as I was sitting here. Where did you find that? Which part?
It's section 5.180.040 specific purposes.
Okay. Oh,
Section
there it
B.
is. Okay.
Section B. Yeah, that to, as far as I can see, is the only language specifically tied to addiction.
Great. Thank you.
Any other committee members, comments, questions? Supervisor Haschak?
Well, what I heard earlier was that some of the programs, such as respite care, crisis residential treatment center, are indirectly dealing with some of these issues, and that at the September meeting, the Oversight Committee is going to be looking at additional funding for SUDT programs. Is that correctly capturing what's been talked about?
Yes.
I think so.
Okay.
Janine, this was one of the ones that was directly pointed at you for response. Do
Correct.
you need any additional information from us, or are there any other comments?
No, I would just, like, how we want to respond would be, because I don't want to respond just as behavioral health, because I feel like these should have been addressed to the committee, because this really is a committee response, which is why I brought it here. And I don't want to speak for the whole committee. So that's my biggest reason I wanted us to meet and have the conversation. So I think if the committee, how do we want to respond? Are we saying we agree, or and then if so, do we want to add in we agree, and the caveat that Supervisor Hashtag added, that there have been some small dual programs funded but not direct funding, which kind of comes out of that first finding, or do we just want to say we agree? Do we want to disagree partially because some of the smaller programs have been funded but not at the scale of 10%? And no direct funding. So that would be my question from the committee on how do we want to respond? And if we say 100% agree, do we want to add something? Yes, Shannon.
Are the responses different? My recollection is that the required responses from the grand jury are different for the findings and the recommendations. So it's not just agree, disagree for the recommendations. Isn't it has been implemented? There's different language.
I have to pull it up.
You want me to read it? I can read it off. I have it pulled up.
And Supervisor Hashtag has his hand raised.
And what I put was this recommendation requires further analysis. And that's one of the options.
Okay, that's good. Yeah, just as we go through the rest of these, could we still have Lily read what the responses are, our choices?
Yeah, do you want her to screen share? There we go.
That's good, thank you.
So I guess we can pick between those how we want to respond to recommendation 2.
I like Supervisor Hashak's recommendation that it requires further analysis. I definitely don't want to say it has been implemented. It's not entirely fair to say it has not at all been implemented. So because it is agendized, we're demonstrating that further analysis already.
Okay, so we'll go with number 3. Well, let's how does the committee feel?
I would support that.
Almond supports it.
I support that. Sherry does.
Myself also.
Supervisor Hashtag, did you have another question? Your hand is still up.
No, sorry about that.
No, that's okay.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
All right. Do we want to make a motion on the recommendation requires further analysis?
I'll move that for recommendation number 2, the committee responds that further analysis is required and provide additional explanation regarding the future agendized discussions on this matter.
I'll second.
And do we want to know, we can say that we're going to do this within 3 months, because it does note the,
Right.
like shall not exceed 6 months from the date of publication, this time frame. So
oops. Was I unmuted? I'm not sure.
Yeah, no, you were muted.
I'm sorry. As the maker of the motion, I support that addition that we are addressing this or analyzing it within 3 months.
Okay.
I'll still second that.
All right. Any other comments or questions from the committee? Any public comment or questions? All right, Lily, will you do?
Sorry,
Go
sorry,
ahead.
I'm always the bad guy. Could I please have that reread since it was amended a little bit? The motion, please.
So we are going with number 3. It requires further analysis. I didn't catch that second part, Shannon, that you added to that, and that it will be completed within 3 months is what I have. But I know you added something after the requires further analysis.
Thank you. Yeah, I said the requires, yeah, that additional discussion on this matter.
Yes, that's what it was.
Has been agendized within the next 3 months. I guess if you could even squish it all together there.
Okay.
All right, Lily, can you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman?
Aye.
Commissioner Ansel?
Aye.
Commissioner Barish? Commissioner Barish?
Yes.
Commissioner Ebiam?
Yes.
Commissioner Rich?
Yes.
Commissioner Riley?
Yes.
Commissioner Muschetti?
Yes.
And Chair Miller?
Yes. So we are going to skip recommendation 3 unless anybody really has a comment on it. It's for the auditor's office. The Board of Supervisors has not requested to respond to that, and neither are we. So we are going to move to recommendation number 4. Commissioner, yes, Commissioner Riley.
Oh, I have a question. I don't even know if we can look this up on the spot right now, but I have a vague recollection that we provided very early direction as a committee to direct staff to also pursue grants to supplement funds. I feel like we did that. Does anyone else have that same recollection?
We did that like year 1 or 2, Commissioner Riley, and we have. So the for example, we allocated funds for dual response, so crisis response with law enforcement, and the county also went out and got grant funds. We got a 4-year grant to augment that, and have been using the grant more than Measure B funds to supplement the program. And so we are consistently looking for grant funds. We know we had the CHAFA grant for the CRT. We've been looking at grants to help with the PUF build. So we are doing it, and we actually have brought some grant funds in already to augment our programs.
Okay, so specifically to address this recommendation, I know that so you've confirmed that the Measure B committee gave that direction.
Correct.
The recommendation actually says the Board of Supervisors give direction. So that was a recommendation from our committee. Did the Board of Supervisors actually follow up on that and give direction to staff? Does understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, we'd have to pull the board. I don't remember who was giving reports out at that time. Tom, was it you giving reports during that period to the board?
Yes.
Do you remember if we brought that to the board?
I don't believe we brought that specific thing. We talked about it. We talked about using the Measure B money for matching grants. That was our whole focus on it, but I don't think we talked to the board because it was more a conversation between behavioral health and the newly organized Measure B committee.
Supervisor Hashcheck?
Yes, in your CEO report, your section of it, I pulled this quote out of it that says, staff are carefully reviewing potential grant options to enhance or expand our services wherever we can. And so that really is the intent of what the grand jury is getting at. And I think that we're doing what they want because it's just good policy.
Yeah, and I can tell you that last fiscal year, behavioral health applied for 25 different grants to, and some were to augment Measure B and some were just to augment programs.
So Janine, do you have a recommendation for how to capture this in a response?
Well, I think it's hard, right? Because I think exactly what we're having is, did the board direct us? Probably. There might have been a meeting actually where when we brought the puff forward or something else forward where the board gave direction that I think there is a meeting where the board said, we want you to consider grants, always looking for grants. And I said, yes, we always do. That's what we're doing. We'd probably have to pull back. I know that the committee has always said, look for grants. I want to say the board directed the department at one time. It looks like Commissioner Antle may know that answer. She's
yeah, so Janine, I think they have. I mean, I can't say specifically to you and your department, but in general to everyone, they are creating a grants division to work all across all departments within the county. So you do have a really broad, and Supervisor Hashak has his hands up as well, but I think that meets the request.
Yeah, it just seems like that's the standing order, right? To be looking for the grants to enhance what the Measure B funding's bringing in.
Well, I would be happy to make a motion to, I guess I want to make sure that, well, before I make a motion, I expect that county staff will confirm dates and direction from the Board of Supervisors. But I think the gist of this is that our recommendation for response is that this has already been implemented and will continue to be implemented.
Do we have any examples of success with this implementation?
Yeah, so we have Tom, we have a 4-year crisis response grant with law enforcement. So you remember we went and asked Measure B and we were awarded a 4-year grant to expand that dual response with law enforcement.
So can we use that in the response as well as the Orchard Avenue facility?
Yeah, we can use the CHAFA grant for the $500,000, and then we can use what we call the CCMU grants for the dual response.
Thank you.
Wasn't the CHAFA grant obtained before Measure B even existed?
It was, but remember they were going to take the money back, and the facility was more, so we then had to go fight and have them be willing to keep the funds for this program, and we almost lost it multiple times. But they were then willing to continue to fund the project once we had the Measure B. So it was applied for prior, yes, correct. But it would have disappeared if, if we didn't have to we'd have to reapply, but we had to go through and redo our milestones and go back in front of their board and advocate to keep the funds.
My personal opinion is that that one doesn't specifically meet the intention of this recommendation. I do support including the mobile outreach grant as a concrete example of this in practice.
Shannon, I agree with you unless Janine writes it in a way that says it was applied before Measure B, it wasn't going to be taken away, but we used Measure B money to help it get resurrected. I mean, the truth is the truth.
Doesn't that almost make it look like we supplanted?
If there hadn't been Measure B, it's fair to say we wouldn't have got it. So I'm not saying that we're making up any facts. We're just stating the facts of what we did. I trust Janine's wording on it, but I'm good either way, included or not. But the fact that we're continuing to look for grants and other funding sources in addition to Measure B money is is something that will be in response. So I'm okay either way.
We've also done some additional grants to augment NAMI and some of the stuff they were doing for Measure B. So we're putting some additional, we got some in, Donna is working with us as we continue to build out NAMI and augment some of the stuff they've been able to do to support Measure B. So especially working with peer support and some of the stuff. So I'll pull our, some of the additional grants. We'll look at all our grants and see whether or not they were augmenting Measure B or not. I won't include them if they don't.
So to clarify, my motion is that our response to recommendation 4 is that we are implementing it and will continue to implement it, or has been implemented, I guess, is the language we're supposed to use.
Right. All right. Somebody want to second that?
Almond will.
Okay. Any other commissioner questions or comments? No? Any public questions or comments? All right, hearing none. Lily, will you do a roll call?
Commissioner Allman,
Aye.
Commissioner Ansel,
Aye.
Commissioner Barish,
Aye.
Commissioner Ebiam,
Yes.
Commissioner Rich,
Yes.
Commissioner Riley,
Yes.
Commissioner Muschetti,
Yes.
and Chair Miller.
Yes. All right, that ends our response to the grand jury, and I will get those written up and make sure we get them submitted on time. Before we adjourn, is there any other comments, questions, or things we need to do that anyone wanted to add in? I think Ace, you covered what you needed, and you'll bring that to the September meeting.
Can we do commissioner reports maybe, so it gives everybody an opportunity to say something?
Yes, I'm happy to do that. Lily, can you do commissioner reports, please?
Yes, Commissioner Allman.
I do real quickly. So I know that on the next agenda is going to be the Ford Street project and SUDT. We've obviously been talking about today. And I don't want to surprise anybody with what I'm going to say at the next meeting. And that's if we're talking this kind of money at 4.3 million, I'm going to say that this needs to go out to RFP where we can get our questions asked of what kind of services are going to be provided and so forth, instead of just agreeing or disagreeing that this is or isn't what we need right now. So I would like for commissioners to think about this. I'm going to bring it up, but so it's on the agenda, and the RFP is something that would clearly allow us to compare the Measure B language to the responses and find out if this is how we want to invest the people's money. Other than that, that's all I have. Thank you.
Commissioner Ansel.
Nothing to report.
Commissioner Barish.
I agree with Commissioner Allman. And I see, I think there's some local problems with giving the money to Ford Street. That's all I have to say.
Commissioner Ebiam.
I just, from the very beginning, the crisis stabilization unit was talked about in the Kemper report, and it's never been a part of any discussion within the committee. And I would like to open that discussion up about possibility of creating a CSU.
So we can put it on the agenda.
Yeah.
Right.
And I have one other thing, which is 3 months between meetings feels like an inordinate amount of time. And I'd love to revisit the possibility of meeting at least every other month.
So Sherry, you will be submitting some agenda items?
Okay, yes, I'll do that.
Commissioner Rich.
No report.
Commissioner Riley.
I don't have anything to report. I want to express concern about having discussions about an item that we all know will be agendized at the next meeting and stating our opinions about it. I think we need to be very careful about Brown Act violations here.
Commissioner Muschetti
Nothing to report, thank you.
and Chair Miller.
Just two things I wanted to bring up. Behavioral health and recovery services for the month of August did a recognition for all behavioral health providers within our community. We really wanted to recognize the hard work they have, and that includes both our mental health professionals and our substance use professionals. So we really took the month of August to recognize the work they've done in our community, and especially through COVID. We're still going through COVID, and mental health and substance use professionals are feeling the after fact of COVID. We're seeing more mental illness and more substance use. And so we really wanted to take this month to recognize them and the hard work they do and the people that they serve in our community. I just also want to add, September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. And we really work to make sure we bring that education to our community this year. We're really looking at trying to do an event every week. We're working with NABI and the Native Connections group that's been created to really do a more community-based outreach to suicide prevention. So hopefully you guys will see that information coming and maybe participate. There's a big suicide walk that Nollyville has done I think this is their 7th year that they do every year. And so we're going to see hopefully a month full of information and education on how to prevent suicides and what resources are available. So thank you guys. So I think that is everything. I want to appreciate you guys for taking the time today and being willing to do this special meeting. It was very helpful and useful for me, so I appreciate that. And with that, I will adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you all. It helped me out a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.